ambitions as Israel warns Ayatollah Ali Khamenei could face late Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein's fate amid escalating Iran-Israel strikes. Meanwhile, the Kremlin backed Trump's claim that expulsion from the G8 in 2014 was a mistake, but called the G7 useless for Russia now. Israeli tank shelling has reportedly killed 59 Palestinians around aid sites in Gaza's Khan Yunis. Meanwhile, the UN rights chief Volker Turk has slammed Israel's warfare for causing horrifying, unconscionable suffering. Volodymyr Zelensky has joined the leaders in Canada seeking G7 support amid Trump's early exit and potential divisions. Meanwhile, Zelensky slams reported Russian strikes that killed 15 in Kyiv as one of the most horrific attacks carried out by Moscow, accusing Putin of targeting civilians to sustain the war. India's aviation regulator has demanded Air India's crew training records after the crash that killed over 270 people in Ahmedabad, Gujarat. This comes as the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau launches a full probe, urging flying schools to face nationwide safety checks. Over 100 people have reportedly been killed in a brutal attack in Yelwata, central Nigeria, amid escalating clashes between herders and farmers over land. President Bola Tinubu is set to visit Benue State as aid agencies rush to help 3,000 displaced civilians. The G7 summit in Canada unfolded amid escalating global tensions as leaders faced down high-stakes trade talks, an unravelling Middle East and the war in Ukraine. On trade, US President Donald Trump and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer sealed a deal cutting tariffs on UK aerospace goods and capping car exports to the US at 100,000 units under preferential rates. Agricultural progress was made, but divisions remain, especially over steel and aluminium. Canada's PM Mark Carney and Trump agreed to finalise a broader deal within 30 days, despite disagreements on tariff philosophy. Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba and Trump failed to reach a consensus on auto tariffs, pushing talks to next week's NATO summit. Meanwhile, Middle East escalations drew global attention after Trump abruptly left the summit. French President Emmanuel Macron claimed Trump returned to Washington to broker a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Trump fiercely denied this, calling Macron publicity-seeking and insisting his departure was for much bigger reasons. The G7 issued a strong statement backing Israel's right to defend itself and calling Iran a threat, while pushing for a ceasefire in Gaza. Trump later said Iran must give up entirely on nuclear ambitions and warned of possible US envoy talks with Tehran. On the other hand, regarding the Russia-Ukraine war, Trump stirred debate by calling Moscow's 2014 expulsion from what was then the G8 a big mistake. The Kremlin agreed but dismissed the G7 as useless in today's world. Trump claimed Putin's exclusion contributed to the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukraine reeled from a deadly Russian strike on Kyiv that killed at least 14 people, according to local officials, and prompted fresh outrage from Kyiv over the world's inaction. Well, as we look towards another day of discussions at the G7, further updates have been coming in from Canada. It is morning over there, and joining us on the programme is Megha Sharma, our Senior Executive Editor at NewsX World, who is joining us from Banff, Alberta in Canada, close to Kananaskis, where these bilateral, trilateral and other talks are taking place. So Megha, we brought an update on the state of play after yesterday's talks. What can you tell us about this morning?
Right now, this morning is going to be majorly dedicated to the outreach nations, the six of them, including India, Ukraine, Brazil, and South Korea, who have descended on to Kananaskis for the G7 plus leaders summit. Their welcome, the official welcome that the G7 nations are going to do of the outreach nations is going to happen at 11 a.m. local time. After that, there is going to be a working session on energy security where all the outreach nations along with the G7 nations are going to participate. After that, there is going to be a spate of bilaterals that is going to take place. India, led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, will be holding bilaterals with his Ukrainian counterpart. Also on the anvil is his bilateral with the Canadian Prime Minister Marconi, the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. So, and there are also press conferences, press briefings that are all lined up because we already saw yesterday the working session of the G7 leaders concluded. Now today is the parting thoughts that are going to be shared by the leaders. So there is going to be the German Chancellor who's going to be holding a press conference. We will have the Italian Prime Minister. We'll have the European Union Commission President. Marconi will also be holding a concluding press conference as the day progresses. It is the third day and the concluding day of the G7 Leaders Summit here.
Absolutely, and that concluding day, Megha, has been shifted potentially in terms of direction given that Donald Trump left last night. Of course, a lot of those countries that you've mentioned who have been invited, not core G7 countries, were hoping to have further conversations with Donald Trump amidst trade tensions globally. How do you think these leaders can still utilise the opportunities they have, and how might they strike further deals with other countries in bilaterals without Trump there?
Yes, this would have been a golden opportunity for a number of these nations, including South Korea and India and Brazil, to have had a one-on-one conversation, maybe on the sidelines, maybe a meet or greet, or even a pull-aside that could have been organized just to send out a message from each of these countries of what is it that they're looking forward in terms of striking a deal with the United States of America. Yesterday, we saw, making the most of the time when the US President was here, a bilateral that took place between the UK Prime Minister and his US counterpart. We also saw, of course, the bilateral that took place between Marconi and Donald Trump, and both of these countries came out hopeful of, in fact, UK and US have already signed that proclamation with that meeting that was held between both the leaders, which seals the deal officially for the UK United States trade deal to come into effect. The date is yet to be announced, even as we speak. And on the matter of the Canada-US trade deal, there has been a 30-day period that has been announced by both the leaders, during which there are going to be hectic negotiations taking place to come to a conclusion and sign an agreement with regards to trade. The Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba was a little disappointed yesterday after he held that bilateral with Trump, saying that they have not been able to reach any conclusive agreement thus far during that short one-to-one he had with President Trump on the sideline. So that gives us a fair idea of how these three countries stand. But equally important was for South Korean President, who has been newly elected and has a lot to carry on his shoulders, towards the economic prosperity of his country to strike that deal with Trump. So again, work is going on at official, the official level between South Korea and United States. Obviously, then there are going to be more talks that are going to be held at the Commerce Ministry level, Commerce Secretary level between both countries, and something similar goes for India and Brazil. So that's where the situation, the status quo is, especially after Trump had to make this sudden exit yesterday night from the G7 summit.
Absolutely. Megha Sharma, thank you ever so much for joining us live from Alberta. We will continue to bring you updates from that G7 summit. Of course, after Donald Trump made his move away, I'm now going to bring in Daniel Roth, who is a research director for United Against Nuclear Iran, who is joining us from New York. Daniel, Donald Trump leaving this G7 summit last night, stating that the situation in the Middle East is something too important for him to miss. He has had conversations with his American counterparts, senior officials, about the next step. Some of the points he's made, saying he's not working on a ceasefire, but is looking towards an end to this conflict. We had a discussion last night about what US involvement in this conflict might look like, and there is a clear sort of look around this Fordo base and potential American bunker busters being used. Can you provide some context on that for us, for those who don't know what the current situation is after Israel launched, of course, widespread attacks on nuclear infrastructure in Iran?
Yes, hello Joshua, good to see you again. Well, the context is simply that Iran has continued to reject all US entreaties to end this crisis that's been going on for the past 2 decades, and that is Iran's illicit nuclear program and the fact that they do want to be a threshold nuclear military power, regardless of the fatwa, etc. In terms of the latest US military action, I do believe that it's been confirmed last night that there were US air operations. That doesn't mean that the US were actually taking kinetic strikes, but clearly there is coordination with the Israeli Air Force, which by all accounts is completely dominating the entirety of Iran, and in particular Tehran, where there are approximately 10 nuclear-related facilities. You may have seen, I think we talked about it last night, the president issued a warning to everybody in Tehran to, quote, evacuate now. Still speculating about what that actually entails, but it is a warning that one would be wise to take seriously, I think. So that's kind of the latest. As far as I can tell, the regime is probably on its last legs, unless it actually decides to take the wise, judicious course, which would be to come to a deal and permanently disable its enrichment facilities. Still, though, even today, the Iranians are saying there's no dice, and they continue to hold out. So that seems to be the latest.
Yes, absolutely. And given Trump's departure, that came at the time of an announcement from Pete Hegseth that US military assets were moving towards the region. The USS Nimitz also refueling tankers which were hauling F-35s heading towards the region as well. Is this looking like a potential full American military deployment in the area, or is this, in your opinion, precautionary given the work that Israel are already doing to destroy those facilities that they have been seeking to do?
I think more the latter. I don't see a full, as you say, to use your word, a full US deployment. It seems like the Israelis have that kind of under control by themselves. Certainly, though, it only increases the pressure and the leverage on the Iranian regime. They may not be enjoying the fact that the nets are kind of closing in on them. In terms of the US planes, yes, there seems to be reports that even some long-range B-2 bombers may have left the US. again, I think this is kind of in support of Israel rather than a full US deployment. But I think we'll know more in the coming hours and days, probably hours, I would say.
Yes, absolutely, Daniel. Thank you. You will be staying with us as we now turn our attention over to the Middle East and look at the further updates we have received in these ongoing tensions between Israel and Iran. Some updates for you. Explosions have rocked Iran's central city of Isfahan today at 7 p.m. GMT as Israel intensified its aerial strikes for the fifth consecutive day. The Israeli military claims it targeted dozens of missile launchers and key military sites in western Iran. Israel also says it struck deep inside Tehran, once again killing Ali Shadamni, Iran's wartime chief of staff, just 4 days after his predecessor was killed in a similar attack. Black and white footage released by Israel's military shows multiple strikes on missile and drone infrastructure across Iran. Iranian media confirmed blasts in Tabriz and Kashan, where 3 people were killed and several were injured. In Tehran, the toll continues to rise. Nearly the entire top echelon of Iran's military has been wiped out, along with leading nuclear scientists. Iran says over 224 civilians have died, but that number is from a couple of days ago. No further update has been provided yet by the Iran administration. In retaliation, Iran says it struck back at Israeli intelligence centres and claims it's preparing the largest missile salvo yet. Over 400 ballistic missiles have already been launched at Israel, leading to civilian casualties. Meanwhile, air raid sirens continue across Israeli cities. Officials confirm that 24 civilians have been killed and hundreds have been injured since these hostilities started. Nearly 3,000 people have been evacuated and at least 35 Iranian missiles have breached the defence systems. Israel says it now holds air superiority over Iran and has disabled large parts of its nuclear infrastructure. The IAEA confirms severe damage at Natanz, but says Iran's Fordow and Isfahan sites remain intact. As regional fears mount, US President Donald Trump says he may send senior envoys to Iran for talks, yet he maintains that Iran must accept strict curbs on its nuclear program to halt the war. Israel's defense minister warned Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, that he could face the same fate as Saddam Hussein. Iranian state media later reported explosions in Tehran. Iran's influence in the region is visibly weakening as key proxies Hezbollah, Hamas and the Houthis have taken hits. Let's have a listen to what Gideon Saar, Israel's foreign minister, has had to say on the ongoing tensions.
Regime change is not an objective of this war. It can be a result, but it's not an objective we put to ourselves in this war. Gradually, first, we cut the hands of the octopus when we dealt with Hamas and Hezbollah. Now we are dealing with the head of the octopus. We are dealing with the most significant threats, and there are the ballistic threats and the nuclear threat, and those threats are combined with their allies to the Iranian axis. And while we are taking this operation, we are no doubt getting a progress in achieving.
Well, as the threat of full-scale war grows, oil markets remain on edge. A fire broke out after 2 tankers collided near the Straits of Hormuz, a key global supply route, but no spill was reported. And while leaders debate diplomacy, civilians on both sides are bearing the brunt. As one Iranian father in Tehran said, "We hide under our dining table. My children haven't slept in days." With missiles still flying and diplomacy hanging by a thread, the region is watching closely. Well, we are once again joined by Daniel Roth, the research director at the United Against Nuclear Iran group. He is joining us once again from, of course, New York. Daniel, we've had some further updates there to bring our audience on the situation. A 5th day of action, further threats ongoing from either side. But is this now really a one-sided war? and a matter of time before serious changes within Iran come, whether that is, as Benjamin Netanyahu has spoken about, the killing of the Iran's supreme leader, or a potential uprising, which has also been discussed by experts and politicians alike.
Yeah, I think one-sided is the correct term to describe what's going on right now. Obviously, it's not all Israel on Iran. Iran has responded with several salvos of hundreds of ballistic missiles in its arsenal. However, they are not targeting, as Israel is, precise military targets or key infrastructure. They are targeting civilian areas in the main. I believe Haifa, the port city of Israel in the west there, was targeted most recently. I know there's been fatalities in Tel Aviv, whereas the Israelis are taking out, as you mentioned in your report, the most recent appointee to the IRGC, Shamkhani.
Yes, Daniel, I'm sorry to interject. Of course, we have this ongoing G7 summit which is taking place, and currently Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who has arrived. We're going to listen in now to what they're saying.
Final information, but for now we have 138 injured people and 12 killed. And so, yes, it's a big tragedy for us, and we need support from our allies, and I'm here, and thank you for the military package. It's important for our soldiers to be strong at the battlefield, to stay strong until Russia will be ready for the peace negotiations. We are ready for the peace negotiations, unconditional ceasefire. I think it's very important, but for this we need pressure. And of course I want to speak with Prime Minister today about sanctions, additional sanctions, and thanks for the real unwavering support from your side, from all the Canadians to our people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, yes, we heard the end of that statement there. Zelensky appearing to talk about deaths and injuries reported. We know there was a strike on Ukraine from Russia reported by local officials. We will get some clarity on the exact content of that and context of that discussion that we jumped into. But of course, Ukraine and Canada allied. Canada are part of the coalition of the willing, a group of allies who are continuing to push for support for Ukraine. That's something that has continued, but US support is something that has waned in recent times. I just want to thank our earlier guest, Daniel Roth, for joining us. We will now shift our attention over to Europe and that conflict that is being discussed between Mark Carney and, of course, Volodymyr Zelensky. Kyiv declaring a day of mourning following Russia's deadliest assaults on the Ukrainian capital. This year, at least 16 people were reportedly killed and over 120 injured, though we have just heard there from Volodymyr Zelensky a potential movement in that number. Hundreds, he said. I understand he said 12 dead, but we just wait for confirmation. That may have been just in one specific area. As soon as we have that, we will bring it to you. But this after Russian forces launched a massive overnight barrage of 440 drones and 32 missiles. A residential block in Solomyansky district was flattened, and over 24 locations in Kyiv were also hit. Meanwhile, in Odessa, a separate Russian drone strike killed one and injured 17 others, including a pregnant woman and a child. As the war continues to intensify, Ukrainian President Zelensky is at this G7 summit in Canada, calling for tighter sanctions, even as US President Donald Trump left early, reiterating calls for a ceasefire and pushing to readmit Russia to the G7, though stating too much had now happened for that to take place. On another front, North Korea is sending 6,000 military personnel to rebuild Russia's Kursk region after helping Moscow repel a Ukrainian incursion. Russia and North Korea have now formalized deeper defense ties under a 2024 treaty. Meanwhile, the European Union is moving to cut off Russian energy entirely, according to local reports. New proposals include requiring countries to submit national plans by March 2026 to end Russian oil imports by 2027. The EU also aims to ban new LNG and gas contracts with Russia starting next year and phase out existing ones by 2028. Exceptions will apply to Hungary and Slovakia until 2028. Well, joining us to discuss the developments in the ongoing conflict that, of course, has taken a back step in geopolitics given the extremity of the tensions in the Middle East. But here is Professor Vasilin Popovsky, Professor and Vice Dean of the Jindal Global Law School. Thank you very much for your time, Professor Popovsky. Further strikes being carried out, a day of mourning announced, signifying the severity, a number of drones and missiles that were used against Ukrainian cities. What's the significance of this timing, given that Zelensky had arrived in Canada and was meeting with G7 nations, of course, where Russia once was a part of, but is no longer in discussions?
Yes, Joshua, indeed, it's symbolic. The day when Zelensky arrived in Canada, in Alberta, a massive hit, 15 or 16 now civilians in Kiev only. There are other civilians in Odessa and elsewhere killed as well, which basically shows the same, that Kremlin is hitting civilian targets primarily. That's what they do. It's a monstrous attack, once again, on civilians, absolutely no military advantage whatsoever. It's simply to kill more civilians. This is the only tactics left for Putin somehow to scare Ukrainians, but obviously he's wrong. He cannot scare Ukrainians. They are very determined and very committed to liberate their country, and Zelensky will meet the, unfortunately, G6. Donald Trump and Marco Rubio left Alberta, which probably was showing how irrelevant and inadequate is this administration. But the rest of the G6 will be offering support to Ukraine. More sanctions on Russia will be announced. The British Prime Minister also talks about more sanctions, severe sanctions to hit energy and other sources. There will be more financial sanctions to limit it, also the military capacity of Russia. So obviously the rest of the world, and I think Donald Trump is an exception here rather than his excuse that he needs to deal with issues in the Middle East is nonsense. He can deal with those from Alberta, Canada. He simply doesn't want to be in that company of democratic and peace-loving countries. He preferred to spend longer time in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere in the world. So yes, a significant day, and let's see the result of the G7, but I'm very hopeful that the G6, the remaining country in Alberta, will offer Ukraine strong support, military support, financial support, continuous commitment, including stronger sanctions on Russia.
Yes, Professor Popovsky, we do have an update coming in. We of course joined that conversation and press briefing between Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky halfway through. But just to bring you an update on what was said by the Canadian leader, Carney's announced $2 billion in Canadian military support for Ukraine. I'm just waiting for clarity as to whether that's US dollars, 2 billion, or Canadian dollars. I'll bring that when we get it. But this, whichever currency, it is still a large amount of money, a large signal as well, maybe more symbolic than anything, than the amount of support that is being provided. Do we expect further leaders who are aligned with Ukraine to do similar? And what impact will that actually have on the battlefields and in Ukrainian cities in this fight against Russia?
Yes, absolutely. Great news. Thank you for bringing it, Joshua. It's really, there will be more to your questions. Obviously, countries like Canada, United Kingdom, the rest of the European Union will offer stronger support, including financial. It will not automatically result with some change on the battlefield, as we understand that there are weapons that need to be delivered as well to Ukraine. But over time, those steps, as the announced $2 billion from Prime Minister Karen in Canada, is significant news. Exactly, as I mentioned, the direction is more support for Ukraine, more military and financial support, plus more sanctions on Russia. That's the way forward here. There is no other way to deal with a monster like Vladimir Putin in Kremlin. It will continue over time, and hopefully Ukrainians will get what they want at some point, in terms of weapons, in terms of support, in terms of ammunitions. And the other good news for Ukraine, by the way, comes exactly from Israeli strike on Iran, because Iran cannot longer support Russia as it used to be doing over the last 3.5 years. So the hits on Iran will obviously mean less support. And that's why Vladimir Putin is desperate. He's calling Trump twice already as to ask Donald Trump not to intervene and not to join Israeli strikes on Iran. Putin is really in the corner. He's very desperate to avoid further Israeli but also American strikes on Iran, which basically decapacitates one of its allies, Iran. So more Israeli strikes on Iran and more support for Ukraine, including military, is the only answer here.
Yes, Professor Veselin Popovsky, thank you ever so much for joining us. That is all we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more updates from the G7, ongoing tensions in the Middle East, and much more from across the world. We'll be back shortly.